In honor of World AIDS Day, I'm going to teach you how to make a beaded AIDS pin. This is something that I learned to make from the Zulu people in South Africa when my husband and I were there as Peace Corps volunteers from 2006 to 2008. So first let me tell you a little bit about the supplies that I use. So first let me tell you about the beads. I have here size 11 Japanese seed beads, and it's really important to get Japanese seed beads. If you get cheaper beads, a lot of times they vary in size and you won't get such a solid straight line, and you'll have trouble getting the beads to look good in the ribbon pattern. So I have here in the colors, this is an opaque red and this is a opaque white matte. And you can use black as your base color in the background, but I find that the white really makes the red stand out, so I usually use white and red. And the other thing about this is size. I use size 11 because I like how tightly together this fits. It is a smaller version, but you can go up a size to size 12 beads if you want. And I've worked with those, I just don't like it as much because it's not as tight of a weave. The next supply is your safety pin. This is something you can get at your craft store. I do order the beads online. You could probably get them at a good bead store though. The safety pins, I pick those up when I go to 5K races. They give them to you with your bibs to hold the bib onto your shirt when you go running, but you can certainly buy those at a craft store also. And I always start with mine open. The next supply is a beading needle, and there are a couple of different kinds. This one has a very large eye opening in the middle, so you really can't go wrong. It's pointy at both ends, so there's no top, there's no bottom, both work. And it's very easy to thread. Another type of beading needle is this very flimsy one, and that can be great too. I just prefer to have something a little more sturdy. And then the last supply is your thread. And I have here a couple of different kinds. There's one that's a little bit more silky, and it's what you'd find at Michael's, and it works great. And then this one is a nylon bead thread. And one note, if you use white beads for your base color, make sure you use white thread. If you decide to make black base color bead, make sure you use black thread because the threading will show. And that is really all you need. And I keep scissors handy, but otherwise it's a pretty inexpensive project to make. So the first thing I do is I take my thread and I unwind about 3 feet or 1 arm's length. And so I've already got that here. And once I've got the thread, I want to put it through my needle. And if you remember, I'm using the one with the eye right down the middle, a little bit sturdier of one. Much easier to thread, as I told you. And the thread does not have to be the same length when you pull it through. You want one long and one short. Now it's time to connect it to the safety pin. And so for that, you're going to go to the little circle on the end of the safety pin, and you're going to tie just a double knot with a little bit of the thread, I call it salvage, left over at the bottom. So double knot. There we go. And again, I like to have my needle open when I'm doing the first row of beads. All right, so my needle, thread, and safety pin are all set. Now I just need to pour my beads out. And for this, I like to have a soft surface. Here I've got a piece of fleece, and I'm gonna dump out just small piles of each bead. And you see they don't go rolling away from me because of the felt pad. All right. So as you can see here, white is going to be my first row. So I'm going to go ahead and get one of these white beads on my needle and slide it all the way down to the bottom where it meets up with the safety pin. Yep. So there you go. This first bead is a little bit tricky, so now you've got it on there. I'm going to hold it against my finger so it doesn't move around on the thread as I come back through the hole with my needle and thread. And right now you can see I've got it looped around my finger, and I'm going to go down through the bead. And this will secure it in place and line us up to get moving with the rest of the project. And here it's important that your thread stays where it's supposed to. So just like that. And you can see that it's looped around the side there. Now you're wondering what I'm going to do with this salvage part. I'm going to start looping my thread around it, and so I'm forcing it to this side of the pin so that every time I put a new bead on it, I'm looping it onto the pin, so it will eventually disappear. So I just put another bead on my needle, and again I'm going to slide it all the way down. And now I've got two beads there. So I want it to be next to it though, because we're stringing the beads along here. We're not stringing them out. So to do that, and this is why I have my pin open, because it's easier for me to loop it around this way. I'm pinching it between my fingers. As you can see, it's looped around my finger again, just like last time. And I'm going to go down through the needle, or down through the bead, excuse me. And once I get it down close, I just have to tighten it up. So now you can see I've got two beads on there. The goal is to have 10 beads across. So we're going to do that again. Put another bead on the needle, slide it down to the bottom, loop it around your finger, and go down through the bead. And that's 3. Do another bead, slide it down towards the bottom, loop it around, and once you get the hang of this, you can start going a little bit faster. My only caution is I leave the needle open for this first row. One, so that you don't accidentally start beading the beads on this side of the pin. It's very important you bead them here, otherwise you won't be able to wear your pin and all the beads will slide off. So it serves as a reminder for me not to do it on the wrong side of the pin. But it also helps make it easier to get the first row attached. Okay, I have 5 now. So 5 more, I'm halfway. And I'm fighting with it just a little bit because I want to make sure that I catch that salvage thread because we're getting close to the end of it and I don't want it just hanging off on me. So there's 6 and our salvage is almost gone now. So the 7th one will take care of it and we won't have to worry about it showing up anymore. Okay, I'm on my last one. This is the 10th bead in the row. And once I complete the 10th one, I'm going to close my pin. There's no longer any need to keep it open. All right, so there we go. And if you look at this pin, we've just completed our first row of whites. Now we have a second row of all whites, so we don't yet have to worry about the pattern. Now, every time you start a new row, you actually have to, except for the first row, every row after that, you have to start by putting 2 beads on your needle. So I've got 2 beads on my needle, and again, I'm sliding them all the way down to the bottom. And I always like to work left to right. So I've got them lined up. I flipped my safety pin over so that I was working left to right again. And you'll see here, there's a little bit of thread that's on top of the last 2. I'm sticking my needle right through it. But I'm holding this thread tight that the 2 beads are attached to because I don't want it to loosen up where I'm coming through right now. So there. And now I have, and I have to arrange them a little bit, I have 2 beads on the second row. But to secure it fully, I have to go up through that second bead. And I'll show you here. So we'll do this a few more times in the coming rows, so you'll have plenty of practice since we do this with every new row. So here we go. I put another bead on my needle, and I'm going through the connecting thread of the rows below, pulling it through, and then I have to go back up through that bead to hold it in place. Now I've got 3 on there. Now I'm going to pick up my 4th bead, and again I'm going to slide it down to the bottom. Really, the reason why I slide it towards the bottom is there's more chances for your thread to knot if it's up at the top and you're just yanking it through. So I always like to see where my bead is at all times. So I went through the connecting thread of the 2 beads below. And you see it's kind of to the side. That's not a problem. I know that the bottom of it is going to be here, so I can just write it the way it should be and pull my thread through it and just tighten it, and now it's lined up perfect. So we're going to do that again. Once you get the technique down, it goes much faster. And so once you learn the first and second row, you pretty much know how to make the weave. The only tricky part then is learning the pattern. And this is the 10th one. So there you go. We just completed our second row. And it's okay, you see that they don't quite line up, but you'll see on this pin, they just go back and forth, and that's been fine. You can actually wiggle it some too and adjust it because it may end up slightly crooked, but the nice thing is you really can stretch it to where you want it to be. Okay, so if you look at this pin, for the third row, there are 3 whites, 4 reds, and 3 whites. So it's pretty easy. We just have to remember after we put 3 whites on there to go to red and then back to white again. So if you remember from the last one, we're going to start with 2 beads at the beginning of each row. So I've got 2 beads on my needle. I'm sliding them all the way down to the end, and I'm putting it through the thread that's connecting the 2 beads below it, pulling it tight. And again, you see this bead is sort of sideways, but that's okay. I know I'm going through it this way, and I can write it the way it's supposed to be by putting my thread through it there. So now the thread is coming out the top of it. Occasionally, you'll want to stop and try and untwist your thread, and you can do that by just letting the thread drop and twist, or you can run your finger down it, just something to get it unwound so you don't get knots in your thread. So now I'm going to do the third white bead, and then remember we're going to switch to red. And I'm going to go back up through the bead. Whoop. Okay, now we're going to put our first red bead on. So we're going to scoop one of those up, slide it all the way to the bottom. We're going to go through the next connecting threads right there, pull it tight, and remember we can't forget to go back up through the bead to hold it in place. The thread should always be coming out the top of the bead before you go and put the next one on. So now we have to do 4 of these red ones. Go into the next thread, pulling the needle through. There we go. Now we've got 2. And now we've got 3, and I'm about to put the 4th on. And there you go. Now we have to switch back to white. And you can see this pin is making it slightly curved. I don't think that'll be noticeable when we get down there. The safety pins aren't always perfect, but I've never had a problem. I think even this one, if you look, has a slight curve to it, but it doesn't affect the overall look of the pin. So again, we're going to pick up a white one to finish off this row. We're going to add 3 more of these white beads. I ended up with a little bit of a knot, and that happens, and usually it's the type of knot that you can just grab both sides and pull, and it snaps right out. So it's good that I at least have a couple of those examples to show you, even though it's never fun to have a knot. And if you're getting a lot of those, I think it's time that you unwind your thread, like I was showing you earlier. Okay, I've got to put one more white. And sometimes if you think that there's a big curve, you can look through your beads. And remember, these are Japanese seed beads. So they tend to be about the same size, but every now and then I can find one that's a little bit fatter than the rest, and I can add that onto the end in the hopes that it'll start to even out my rows a little bit and get rid of that curvature that the safety pin has created. Okay, so now we're done with 3 rows. And if you remember, going back to this pin, now we're going to start here with the 4th row. We're going to have 2 whites, 5 red, followed by 3 whites. And the reason why you know that it'll be 2 is you will want to make sure that your reds stair step out from the 4 that you just had. So you should have a red on the outside of both of the rows that are above. Okay, so at the beginning of a row, the first thing we do is put 2 white beads on, or black if you decided to do black as your base color. And remember, I like to do left to right, so I flipped my safety pin. And I have to go back up through that 2nd bead. All right, we got a good start to our 4th row. And actually, so that was 2. We're gonna have to put a 3rd white one because you'll see the red one will start here. So we'll do 3 whites to start the 4th row. Alright, and now I can start my red so that it stair steps out from the 4 above. So I just reached the halfway point, and you can see here with this bead that I'm about to do the middle row that has 4 white, 2 red, and 4 white. So this really doesn't take that long. After you've made a few rows and get the hang of the technique, you can make one of these aid pins probably in about 40 to 45 minutes. So remember, for the beginning of each row, we take 2 white beads and I string them all the way down, remembering I like to do left to right. And I'll loop it through the thread in the row right below it, and not forgetting to go back up through that 2nd bead. So I'm going to do that again, get another bead on my thread, tightening it up, and going back up through it. So I'm going to do the 4th white. Something you want to be careful of when you're going to go back up through the needle, make sure you don't go back through the thread on the bottom or your bead will come right off the thread. You want to make sure that you are not at all catching that thread on the bottom. So I'm going to go back up through. Alright, and now I'm ready to do the 2 red. And now I can finish with the 4 white. And then one more note before I go there. You'll see here that we're doing the 2, but then every row that comes after is a repeat in reverse of what we just did. So you see that there's 3 red here, just like there were 3 red above this row. Then there's 4 red, just like the row above that. And then there's 2 red, a white, followed by 2 red, which is exactly what we had up here. So it's just like a mirror effect, except you're stopping after you get your row with 2 white, 2 red, 2 white, 2 red, 2 white. And so you're not completing the full top or bottom of the ribbon that we have up here. So it is a simple pattern, and I'll show you once we get down to the bottom and complete our 2 white rows how to make a fringe if you want it. So going back here, I'm just going to finish out this row. So I'm getting to the end of my beaded aids pin. I am finishing up the last row of white before I add the red fringe onto the bottom. So I just have a few more white to put on, and then I can show you how to finish this off. As you can see, I told you to use 3 feet approximately of thread, and I am coming right down to the end of mine, so there won't be a lot of waste. So let me finish off the white beads here. All right, last one. Okay, now we're going to use a different technique to put on the red beads at the bottom. You see, they're not true rows. What I'm going to do is put 3 red on the string. So I've got 3 there, and I'm going to go up through the last bead. And depending on the size of your thread and your needle, it may be difficult to get the thread and the needle through, so you might really have to pull. Again, that'll depend on the size of the thread that you chose and the size of your needle, and also the size of the beads. So now I want to go back through the next bead, go up through it. Oh, you can see I'm having trouble with mine. And if this happens, I like to keep pliers nearby to actually help me pull it through. And I just broke my thread. Which is fine. I'm still going to go ahead and pull it through. And now I just have less thread to work with. So I'm going to rethread my needle. That doesn't usually happen. So now I'm going to put on another 3 red beads. And I'm going to go down through the bead right next to it. Again, I'm going to have to use my pliers. There we go. I chose a heavier weight thread. I don't usually have this problem when I use the lighter weight thread. Alright, so I'm going to add 3 more red beads. Alright, back up through the one next to it again. Making a mess of my beads here. Okay, so I'm going to get 3 more red after I scoot all these back up onto my workspace. back up, and this will be our last set. Alright, lost a couple of white beads. That's okay. Alright, so grab the last 3 white, last 3 red beads. Slide them on. And you're done stringing your beads. So now we just need to tie it off. And the best way to tie it off is to take this leftover thread and just keep weaving it back into the beads, into the white beads. So I'm just going to go to the next bead closest to it and put my needle up through it. And again, because I use that thicker thread, I'm going to have to use my pliers to pull it through. I'm not going to worry about those right now. Actually, just brush them all off to the side so I don't keep doing that. Alright. And let's see, I'm going to grab my needle. It looks like my thread is caught a little bit down here. There we go. And you just have to do this a few times. You don't have to do it, a lot. The thread is in there pretty tightly already. You can tell just by the fact that I'm using my pliers so much. And actually, I already tore my thread again, so I have to pull this back out and rethread it. But as long as you get it in through a couple of beads, it should hold tight. I mean, this probably would even stay if I didn't want to try and do it again. But we'll see. Maybe I'll get lucky and it'll let me get through another bead or two. Alright. Hope I haven't put it all the way through. Okay. Alright, I think it's telling me it's time to quit. So as soon as I've got it through a few beads, I take my scissors and I cut it off as close to the beads as I possibly can. It's nice I've got very sharp pointed scissors. And I shouldn't have to worry about that coming apart at all. If you can get it through more, I would say just weave it into a couple more. But again, because it's so tightly woven, you shouldn't have any problems with it falling apart. So we have a finished bead spin.